bit of an update on what the Lacombe Daycare Center has been up to over the past year. And so our mission as the Lacombe Daycare is to provide quality childcare which benefits the child, the parent, the staff, and the community. This mission guides our staff and our board in their operations on a daily basis. As far as the historical, a little bit of history on the Daycare Society. Daycare has been a cornerstone Lacombe community for almost 40 years. Its home has been in the current facility for 30 years, and during that time the demand for daycare has grown and the need to expand services is constant. As far as our, just to give you an overview of our current programs, we have the daycare program, so that's newborn to 6 years, and that's in the daycare facility. And we average 50 children in care. We can hold up to 54 children. The before and after school care for school age kindergarten up to 12 years old. And they average 20 children per day, and their capacity is 30. And that program is run out of the Lacombe Leisure Centre, upstairs of the arena. And then they also run a school age summer program for 6 to 12-year-olds, and they average 15 full-time children and about 8 part-time children. So that gives you an overview of our current programs. Operational assessment. When the Children's Resource Centre project did not move forward, of which the daycare was a major partner, the board saw the need to carry out an assessment and determine how to best move forward given the current facility pressures on the daycare operations. Input was sought from parents, board, and staff through numerous surveys, an interview with various childcare programs in the area and around Central Alberta, and we also had a board planning session. So a number of recommendations had come out of that operational assessment, and we'd just like to share those findings with you this evening. And I'll turn them over to Canada.
Alright, so the board has identified a series of short-term outcomes to achieve within the next year based on the recommendations coming out of that recent assessment. Staffing is not allocated as effectively and as efficiently as it could be, and adjustments are being made accordingly. There is plans to try to spruce up the facility with a focus on trying to get an aesthetically pleasing, safe, and playful learning environment. We also want to try to enhance the engagement of parents and getting volunteers over the next year. The outreach in the community is to develop a range of partnerships, and this is a priority, which in turn will increase community awareness. The programs offered by the Society will be ones of quality and excellent, and we will strive to be consistently at full capacity, thus making the most efficient use of the available resources. And the Daycare Society has committed to being a strong player and also at the C4 table. Okay. So with respect to operational risks, the board has identified the operational risks that need to be considered and mitigated in moving forward. And this slide just summarizes them. With respect to moving forward, the Society has determined a plan for moving forward while mitigating previously mentioned risks. And in doing this, the Society has developed an interim facility plan which includes a focus on reallocation of staffing resources as well as working on the current facility enhancements. Come on. There we go. Alright, so the interim facility plans includes these 4 areas of focus. So we obviously need to discontinue operations at the current facility while implementing facility enhancements. We need to continue the before and after school program at the Lacombe Sports and Leisure Centre while exploring other options, looking at other schools or other different areas that we might be able to use. And then also continue the school age summer program at the Lacombe sports and leisure complex as well. With respect to daycare operations, we would like to try to include a new executive director position, and then have an allocation of current staff positions to better address the needs of the programs, as well as the achievement of identified short-term outcomes over the next year. So, we had kind of made a list of some facility enhancements and stuff that we need to do. We need to upgrade security. All the interior flooring needs to be replaced. The walls need to be painted. Children's lockers need to be replaced, and the outdoor play center is in need of upgrades. Space is a challenge in this facility. A storage shed will be purchased to free up indoor space for children's activities, and the society is currently in negotiations with the city, who is the landlord, on the repairs and upgrades needed. Volunteer labor will be used to paint the interior of the facility, as well as assist with the cleanup plan. Costs have been identified for each of the items listed, with a total cost of just under $30,000. We would like to update the outdoor play area and are also considering a caretaker contract, which are not included in the above mentioned costs. Our plan is to investigate possible grants for upgrading the outdoor play space and to include the caretaker contract into the 2014 budget year. Support request. The society wishes to request the city allow the daycare to utilize up to $60,000 from the Capital Reserve Fund, which the city holds in trust, in order to move ahead with hiring an executive director. This position is crucial in developing partnerships with the community, organizational leadership and management, increasing community awareness of the daycare programs, and fund development. In addition, it is hoped that through negotiations with the Alberta Children's Services, the facility enhancement costs can be accessed using part of the regional partnership grant held by the city of Lacombe. The city of Lacombe has been very supportive of the Lacombe daycare, and we appreciate your partnership. The Community Services Department and the Parks and Facilities staff have worked alongside our staff and board for many years. We know that parents and caregivers play the most important role in the lives of young children, but other community supports also play an important role in raising healthy children, and we thank you for all that you do in providing a safe and caring community environment for our young children and their home families. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. And I think what we'll do while you're here, I think we'll move right into the proposal on our agenda. We'll move down into the new business. Under Council Legislative for Lacombe Daycare Society proposal. And I'll just have you guys stay up here and be part of the discussion if there's any questions. And I will turn the floor over to Director Vaughn.
Thank you, Mayor Christie, and thank you for your presentation. And thank you for turning on my mic. So as you've heard from the daycare, they have continued to work along to improve their circumstance, and their circumstance largely is facility. And the operational review that they conducted, that they just spoke of, identified two key issues, and one is they really need to develop a business model, because one of their greatest limiting issues is the revenue and expense cash flow. And that's not particular to this daycare. Daycares across the province struggle with these kinds of things, and in fact daycares that are the most successful are in other buildings with other partnering and like services. And in many cases they're in facilities that are fully sponsored by a municipality. So I think that the desire to expand their staff to include a business manager or an individual who has the capacity to develop the business model, as well as raise their profile within the community and go out and meet with industry and employers in order to look for possible partnerships, I think is significant to the daycare being able to relocate themselves, whether that is within the C4 Performing Arts Daycare Partnership building or whether that's in another facility. So I think that the fact that they've done the operational assessment, identifies that they've performed this with due diligence. I think the second key role is, that they mentioned, is the enhanced programming or the enriched programming. And certainly that is a key element that parents are looking for when they are placing their children in care for the day or the evening or whatever the case may be. And so the executive director position would certainly be able to cover off those two circumstances, and I think support the daycare to continue to move ahead. So the reason that this issue is coming to council is because in 2003, City Council purchased the existing building that the daycare is in, and a condition of that sale was that any funds that remained after the mortgage and line of credit were paid for would be placed in a trust account. So the trust account was developed, and the funds have been held and managed by Chapman Rebec, and the money is in fact the daycare's money. It does not appear in the city's financial statements, and we don't have anything to do with the funds. But as you can see, this clause in the agreement identifies that should they wish to spend the funds on anything other than capital or a new facility, that they would require council's consent, and that council would not unreasonably withhold that consent. And so that is the reason that we are bringing this request forward to council this evening. Just second to that, they've referenced the regional partnership grant. The city does in fact hold the regional partnership grant funds of $181,000. And those funds were secured on behalf of the daycare when the Children's Resource Project was underway. And those funds are limited to improvements within a daycare. So they cannot be used to build a building, but they could be used to buy equipment or paint walls or make improvements on the inside of the building. So I have had preliminary discussions with Human Services regarding these grants, funds, and the use of them for this project. What will have to happen is council will make their decision this evening. The daycare will then send a letter to Human Services asking to be able to use partial funds from the regional partnership grant, and we would expect approval to be given to us to release those funds for those particular items. And I believe I can answer any questions if council have any.
Thank you very much. Councillor Boswell.
Thanks, Mayor Christie. I understand where you are coming from in that you want to have this money for this executive director, but this position, we haven't heard whether or not there would be intentions to continue that position beyond the one-year contract, because the funding model that you have at present is not very sustainable. There's only so many funds available within that trust account. What is the intentions beyond the 1 year?
The intention would be hopefully to continue with the position. We feel that the position of the executive director would be able to do a considerable amount of work in fund development. There are a number of different grants and operating grants out there that we're currently not accessing, but that person would be able to follow up and do those kinds of things, as well as getting out there and doing some more community support, possibly some community fundraising, those kinds of things, where the daycare right now doesn't have the capacity to do that.
So further to that, the funding that is in that trust account, of course, will go, not very far, but it will go a little ways towards the capital expenditure of a new center. Of course, that's going to be hit dramatically with this $60,000 reduction. Has there been efforts made towards any funding for this position beyond what we are seeing here today?
No, not other than looking at our current operating budget to see if we could somehow facilitate that, and it's not possible. So, there's grants out there for other things, but it's hard to get it for operational, for salary.
So in a way, what you're requesting from us tonight is a kickstart for this particular position to enable this new director to, as you said, do some fund development in the coming year.
And raise the profile of the daycare.
Yes.
I think that's crucial at this time. And they're kind of at a standstill, so they certainly could use the extra resources to help them with that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Foster?
Thanks, Mayor Christie. Well, Tammy, I've known Susan for quite a while, and I can say that I'm very surprised that you guys have been able to function this long without coming before us before this. This building has been in pretty bad shape, and I recall when FCSS agreed to come in with a person of some description to help out and raise the profile. So obviously it's got to the state now that these needs are before us, and so I think it behooves us to make a decision fairly quick to get this facilities up to standard, I think. So thank you for bringing it to our attention tonight.
Councillor Kite?
Thank you, Mayor Christie. I echo Councillor Foster's sentiments, and just wanting to say from what we have heard previously when we were looking at the Children's Resource Centre and why it was necessary, the condition of the current daycare, I think that these steps are crucial for the current daycare to survive, and more so to make sure that the environment is safe. And for that, I will definitely support this proposal.
Councillor Connick, then Councillor Creasy.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. My comments would echo those of Councillor Bosma. While I think it's a good idea to hire an executive director, I'm concerned about, about year two. I mean, you'll hire someone that'll just get going in the position, and then you'll have to worry about retaining them for year two. So that's my concern here. I think it's a good idea. I sure hope that in a year's time you'll come up with some funds to retain that individual, because my experience has been this type of work takes years really to develop and to grow. So well, I guess it's a good use of the funds. My concern is year two, so hopefully that will, in that year, you can come up with those extra funds. I would hope.
Councillor Creasy? Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add, we may find after a year perhaps there may be not enough funds there to have that position as a full-time position, but maybe, it may be a part-time or not on a full-time basis.
Councillor Creasy.
Thanks, Mayor Christie. First off, I want to recognize the board for having the foresight to do the work you've done and acknowledge some of your current weaknesses and the strengths that you have going for you. That's good to see. Positive moving forward. I too have some issues with the funding model for the position that you're hiring, and I would refer back to the restriction that was placed on those funds. As it reads in here, after Director Vaughn had mentioned for paying off the existing mortgage line of credit, which I'm sure has been done, those funds were to be placed in trust for use in the acquisition or development of a new daycare facility. And I'm not arguing with the role of the executive director. I don't know that we can necessarily stretch that position to meet the restrictions that were put on here. And for that reason, I would suggest that we try and come up with some alternate ways to fund that position. If the primary goal is for this individual is to secure more funds and grants and whatnot, I mean, that is something that city personnel are quite familiar with, and we've helped with numerous projects in the past, secure funds and whatnot. So for those reasons, I think it is beyond our control to issue those funds for these purposes.
Any further discussion, questions? Councillor Rempel?
Thank you, Mayor Christie. Thanks, Fran, for bringing that up, because that was something that I wanted to find out as well, too. I know what it says the funds are supposed to go to, but I guess I'd want some direction from the administration as far as using those funds for other things and what's named there. What liabilities do we have, or concerns do we have with that?
Director Vaughn?
To Councillor Rempel, I don't know that we would have any liability. The restriction that the funds would be spent on the development of a new daycare facility were placed on there by the council of the day. And so it would be this council revisiting a decision that had been made in 2003. I'm not privy to that discussion, obviously, but so liability, I'm not sure there would be liability. And your second question was?
Well, it was kind of just along that same line, you know, would there be any liability, or do we just have to decide and make it known in the minutes that we've decided to change that decision of the previous council? I guess I just want to make sure that if we decide to go ahead with this, that we don't have anything come up after that goes, oh, you know what, we really shouldn't have been able to do that. That money has to stay there. So I just want to be assured of that if that's the route we decide to take. And the reason I ask that is because I think that there's we definitely have a need here, and if it's going to take some of this money to get this ball rolling and things fixed and possibly made better, I think it's a small amount of money to pay to make sure that our daycare future is safe here in town, and we can continue on with this.
So just to follow up on that, the sales agreement was between the City of Lacombe and the Lacombe Daycare Society. And this is the one clause that is in the agreement with respect to the remaining funds. But we have not received a legal opinion or anything like that that would comment on whether or not this council was able to make that decision.
CEO McQuarrie, then Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. To Councillor Rempel, certainly in terms of the funds, there are no parental restrictions, and I know oftentimes with grant funding that the municipality receives, there are restrictions in terms of how those monies can be allocated or appropriated and ultimately expended. In this instance, those restrictions don't apply. As indicated by Director Vaughn, the restriction on how the funds can be utilized came from the council that was in office at that time. So certainly it's under the purview or the prerogative of this council to determine if you'd like to make a change to that or not.
Okay, thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Foster, Councillor Kite, then Councillor Creasy.
Thanks, Mayor Christie. So I guess I just want to go back in time again, just to remind the ones that were involved and to perhaps educate the people that weren't involved. This society has struggled for a long time. The building has never been up to standard. FCSS stepped in. We made the request for FCSS to step in, and I remember the board, as I sat on that board with FCSS, the discussion around that table was quite unanimous in helping out this daycare society, and so I think that it really is important that we do this thing right, and as I see it, what I'm reading between the lines is that FCSS timeframe has not got the time to be the executive director of this association. They need some real support of people putting time in and getting this thing up to speed. Yeah, financially it's always going to be a struggle, but I think that as a community we need to step up and let's not forget that previous councils and our council decisions are changed all the time.
Councillor Kite?
Thank you, Mayor Christie. That was going to be my comment too, that even this council has changed previous council's decisions, and so this would not be another one, or can be another one. And for that, I would like to make the motion that we approve the use of funds currently held in trust on behalf of the Lacombe Daycare Society in the amount of $60,000 for the purposes of hiring an executive director for a 1-year term.
Thank you. Councillor Creasy?
Thanks, Mayor Christie. So, once again, as far as the history of this facility, rather than insult the many Lions members who raised an awful lot of money to make this facility a reality and suggest it was never up to snuff, I think is not a tremendous message to be sending to volunteers who work diligently to provide it in the first place. I just wanted to make Councillor Foster aware of that. It was with a great deal of contention that was built in the first place and nearly broke the club and created a lot of hard feelings. All that aside, I do want to once again reiterate the fact that although I do appreciate the Society's wishes for this position, I think that in fact it was their organization that it was the other half that agreed to the restrictions placed on these funds, and this is not what they were intended for. That's not to say that the position wouldn't be of use and that it isn't justified, but these funds were not intended for that use.
Councillor Boswell?
Thanks, Mayor Christie. A couple of comments. One being that infrastructure for any use that is quote unquote for the public, and including municipal facilities, etc., it becomes clear to me the need to have appropriate facilities that will be long lasting. Even though this particular project was done some years ago in 1983, it obviously was something that was felt to be appropriate for the time, and at that particular time also the requirements were a little bit different, particularly relating to accessibility for those who have mobility issues, handicap accessibility, that sort of thing, which of course now is not very achievable within that existing facility and becomes extremely complicated. So I understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate the fact that the Society is looking at doing some cosmetic enhancements to make it that much more appealing and safe for the children. The other comment that I had to make was regarding this particular position. One of the long-term goals is to have continued collaboration with the C4 initiative. Could that also be defined as creating the development of a new facility? I mean, it all has to work together, I would think, right? So it's a matter to me of, if you have an executive director who's not concerned about the day-to-day operations, that particular person could also be doing all these short-term and long-term achievements, but one of the long-term ones being a new facility.
Yes, well, certainly that's how we see this position, is taking on a leadership role and being able to be part of those very important partnerships. And as far as the funds being set aside, yes, the Daycare Society, they didn't take this decision lightly. They would like to see the funds remain so that they have something to bring to the table when it comes time to invest and so on and so forth. But at this point, they just feel it's important to invest in what we have right now so that it's stronger and a more viable society, so that we can be part of C4 and continue on to Daycare Society.
Thank you very much. The motion is on the floor. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion is carried. Thank you very, very much for coming out. All right.
That's right, that's right. Yep.
We will go to bylaws. Lacombe Fire Department bylaw 389. Lacombe Fire Services. Director Mitchell.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. So before you tonight is bylaw 389, which was presented at the last meeting for first reading, and is before you tonight for consideration for second and if possible third reading. This memo has made a couple of slight updates to the memo itself, but more importantly, we provided a rather lengthy line-by-line change to the bylaw, which I have to admit was a bit difficult in the fact that this is a, for all intents and purposes, a brand new fire services bylaw, quite a bit different than what was previously proposed. And so we've been able, where we can, to show some line-by-line comparisons. But just from a big picture highlight point of view, just wanted to go through 14 or 15 areas where we've themes that we have changed. Definition, certainly a big chunk of changes that were made, and a lot of that dealing with change in legislation. Maybe the definition referred to old statutory definition that have been changed. Of course, we've clarified the duties and the relationship with the fire chief in the city's organization. That's certainly one of the bigger changes that we've made. We've also, from an operational point of view, clarified the chain of command over at the fire chief with regards to the member in charge and the officers. That's certainly a bit confusing in the old bylaw. So we clarified. Certainly fire, just like police, is a very top-down structure in terms of command, although our command chief certainly works with our members in terms of consultation, so I don't want to make that look like this is the involvement of the members themselves in terms of policy doesn't occur, but from a chain of command in emergencies, roles and responsibilities have to be clear. We removed the references to disaster services. This is a department of the city, and so it has a role within the city emergency management bylaw, so there is no need for disaster services in this bylaw. Clarify the area of jurisdiction. This is a very important part in the bylaw because our members do serve outside of the corporate boundaries of the city. So this bylaw doesn't address the services that are provided in those areas, but it just does give them authority to be part of agreements to be involved in. And there's 3 areas that involves. Certainly our fire services agreement with Lacombe County, which deals with all the services that we currently provide them. We also do mutual aid agreements, and so those include areas such as City of Red Deer, Panoka being one of our main mutual aid partners, Sylvan Lake, many of the partners that are outside Lacombe County. And third, we do create the opportunity for agreements with other organizations within the county, and specifically I refer to the Lacombe Mutual Aid organization, which is actually a private sector initiative of Nova, Dow, and all the other large industrial members of that county mutual aid organization. So those are the 3 areas of service levels outside the boundaries that we deal with and clarify in the bylaw. We have banned all open fires within the city and removed provisions for fire permitting. This just deals with, identifies the fact that we actually have, in my 7 years, almost 7 years here, we've never issued an actual fire permit. We just don't do it. We have clarified that fire pits, barbecues, fires at the campgrounds, those all remain, and they're defined in the bylaw itself, so that remains unchanged. We've created a link between this bylaw and the city's fire policies and procedures, as well as maintaining the link with the Regional Services Association, which provides recommendations on policies and procedures for the service. Again, we've provided provisions for entering fire services agreements, which deals with the service areas above.
We've introduced an actual mechanism for fire bans, and that's consistent with the mechanisms that are used throughout the province. There's different, we don't identify in the bylaw, but there are different levels of fire bans that are issued by municipalities, and this provides a mechanism and delegates that authority to the fire chief. We've updated again, we mentioned, we updated the relationship between the Lacombe Fire Department and the Regional Fire Service. The old previous bylaw 270 wasn't clear as to who had authority, whether it was the regional chief or what we call the district chief. So we've clarified that now that it is actually the city fire chief that is the authority in terms of actually managing the department. And we've updated the new penalties section, identified specific fines, and those are consistent with surrounding municipalities, but also it's consistent with policies and procedures we do for actually laying charges that we've updated in other bylaws. And finally, we've implemented or provided a mechanism for false alarms and provided fees and fines for those instances as well. So I'd be happy to take any specific questions or Council may have about that.
Thank you very much, Council. Councillor Creasy.
Thanks, Mayor Christie. So we went over this a little bit at Regional Fire Services, and as far as clarifying the chain of command about that, I think it's certainly a great step. I was just curious with section 6.3, authorizing the payment for the possession or use of equipment but for the purpose of fighting a fire. Well, I think I understand the intent of that. I would assume that refers mostly to emergency situations in that position of whatever. I just wondering if that isn't possibly a little too open-ended. I mean, I can appreciate the fire chief member in charge, but it goes on to say anybody directed by the fire chief or a member in charge, which theoretically could be any firefighter. Just wondering if this isn't perhaps a little too open-ended.
So we've combined a number of sections because the previous bylaw, there was roles for the fire chief, there was roles for the member, and there was roles for the member in charge. And there's actually, both the fire chief and the member in charge are actually on the scene at the same time. It wasn't clear who actually was in charge. So these sections actually can consolidate that, and that's why you see all three members there. Really it comes down to who's been ever delegated the authority at that specific site. So it also clarifies that if the fire chief's on site, he's by default in command. In terms of the actual authorities themselves, these are fairly standard with regards to other fire departments. And we don't use these that much within the city, but they're used all the time in the county. So water trucks, excavators, especially for grassland fires, they use equipment. And that provides, that's why there is provisions in the bylaw here for charging back fees for certain services. We don't necessarily will be doing those in this case, but there are those instances where we do those types of things. And so again, it's only where they've been directed or whether that's authority from a senior officer or whoever might be in charge of it. So there's always intent that either the fire chief or a member in charge is always in charge of that scene. And that's consistent with what we're doing with what's called the incident command system. So there's always someone in charge. They may delegate at the scene someone to go do something. The accountability always goes back to the member in charge and also the fire chief.
Appreciate the clarification, thanks.
I do believe you're looking for second and possibly third reading this evening, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Mayor Christie. I'd like to move that council give second reading to the City of Lacombe Bylaw 389.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? So carried. And is there any wishes to go to third reading this evening? Councillor Boswell.
Thanks, Mayor Christie. I would make a motion that council give third and final reading to the City of Lacombe Bylaw number 389.
Thank you. Any further discussion on third reading? All those in favor? So carried. All right, we will go down to Infrastructure Services and Public Works, Solid Waste Roadmap. Director Gowdy? Do you want to start?
Thank you, Mayor Christie. Before council this evening is a number of memorandums that deal with the public consultation that's been undertaken in terms of the solid waste roadmap for the city of Lacombe. Certainly, the consultation was very extensive and very comprehensive, and in a moment, Director Gowdy will present those results to you. Prior to him doing so, I would like to state publicly that in some of the public feedback received, individuals are named. And I know that there is one individual in the gallery this evening, Mrs. Pickett, is one of the individuals that were named, and I would like to publicly apologize that the name did appear in the public responses. So on behalf of the city of Lacombe, I do extend that apology. Certainly the other name that appeared in these responses, they both have been removed from the responses, and certainly will endeavor to make every effort to ensure that this doesn't occur again, and there will be a follow-up written correspondence, just certainly acknowledging this and extending our apology in writing. So having said that, I'll turn it over to Director Gowdy to elaborate on the details of the report.
Thank you, CEO McCoy. Mayor Christie, to the rest of council, I have a short presentation and then we'll go through the memos one by one from there, if that works. So I have a presentation here that I've called One Piece at a Time. We're looking at sort of a step-by-step approach to hopefully some enhancements to Lacombe's solid waste management system that are going to work for the community and be reasonable approaches to reducing our impact on the environment. So just a quick summary of the presentation. These are just an accompaniment of the agenda items, so I'm going to be going through very briefly. And of course, there's more detail available to you in the written memos that were attached to tonight's council agenda. And so we'll be going through those as well. So initially, I'll just do a quick overview of some of the public consultation efforts that we undertook and some of the feedback that we received there, what was successful, what wasn't. I'll make a recommendation for recycling in Lacombe, a recommendation for composting in Lacombe, and then a recommendation for the residential bin types in Lacombe, which of course is one of the more controversial portions of the initial solid waste roadmap that led to the consultation with the Western Council. So a quick summary of the public consultation. We did have, as CEO McCord indicated, a fairly successful public consultation process this summer, where we think that we have given a good opportunity for the community to give some feedback and provide their input. So starting with the Rethinking Lacombe Solid Waste Survey. This was an online survey and a hard copy survey. We received about 750 total responses to that survey, so that's a very good response rate. And I think that really helped us inform some of the recommendations that are before council this evening. We piggybacked on the citizen satisfaction survey that was starting right at the beginning of this public consultation process. So Director Vaughn was kind enough to let us throw some questions in there about about the solid waste system. And this was a really good survey because it's actually statistically representative of the demographics of the community. So the households that make up this survey are a true sort of micro shot of the households that make up our community. So I think that it's a really important piece, and being able to combine efforts was really helpful to us. So I think Director Vaughn for that. We also jumped on the business satisfaction survey just to look at recycling. If a blue bin program did come into Lacombe, what could be done with commercial recycling. So we had 173 businesses surveyed there. We had some postage card size sort of single issue comment cards. We received 31 of those back during our public consultation events. We had solid waste barbecues. We had 2 of those over the summer. Had about 700 attendees. Now I'm sure that some of those were duplicates, and probably so there's duplication between that and some of the survey, and so I do encourage you to, although some of these numbers look really high, they're not straight add one to the other and say, oh yeah, we reviewed 2,000 people or anything like that. But we did get a very good cross section of the community. We had a public open house, had about 30 attendees to that open house that happened in September there. We were at 15 farmers markets, talking about this in conjunction with some other city events that were going on. So over the summer, we had presence at each of the farmers markets. We of course had a pilot project of about 100 households in the community that we tried a number of the different systems that we were considering. We implemented those in the pilot project areas and then sort of saw how they worked and what worked, what didn't. So we went door to door through those communities 4 times throughout the summer to each household and got about 55 out of 100 households returned special surveys to us about the pilot project itself. So about a 50% return right there. Total cost was allocated by council in the spring there in April, $17,150, which we have expended. So just a quick graphic of the Rethinking Lacombe Solid Waste Survey results, highlighting just a few things. You'll see that some of the questions were split out, sort of 2 separate streams, depending on whether residents had indicated that they were currently using a black roll-up bin or an alley bin. And so some of the bigger highlights there are that if you look at the bottom left, and sorry, the resolution line will walk you there, but the question says, would you prefer an individual black roll-out bin instead of a dumpster? So this is a question just to those that responded that they currently have alley dumpsters, which was 77% of the surveyed respondents. And 81% of those residents said that they prefer to keep the alley dumpsters. So that's a really significant number that I think council should definitely consider during this process. And then on the other side of that one, of course, you see the rate of maneuverability of the black rollout. Now this is from residents that currently have black rollouts, so they've had them for some time. Certainly gone through summer and winter. And you can't really see it there, but it is highlighted in one of the memos. You've got 1% of people currently using those that say they're very difficult to use, and then a further 6% that feel that they're difficult to use. Other highlights, so one thing that surprised us actually on the bottom right of the graphic there, one of the questions is whether households would utilize a finished compost product from the city if it was made available. And sort of surprising was that only 19% would be willing to pay any sort of fee whatsoever for the compost, and just about half of the respondents said flat out that they wouldn't use it no matter what. The most common reason given was that people weren't sure of the composition of that compost, and so they were worried about weeds or some sort of contamination or that sort of thing from sort of the uncontrolled or unknown constituents of the compost itself. So, of course, the pilot project was one of the bigger portions of this consultation process, and we wanted to see if there would be an impact from some of the changes that we had recommended in the original solid waste program. So, in May, we did some benchmarking and looked at what is the actual garbage coming out of the communities that we're going to be checking these different systems in the pilot project areas. June, we introduced the curbside recycling. July, we switched to the dumpsters for rollouts throughout all the communities. And then in August, we expanded both the availability of the green bin program and the materials that would be accepted in those green bins. And so we definitely saw an impact. Now, this is just a 4-month process, so it's tough to say, oh, this is what you'll see if you implement it citywide. But as a snapshot, we did see about a 20% decrease in the volume of solid waste coming out of those communities that was headed for the landfill, and probably 10 to 15% increase in the recycling. And you can see that there by the interpolation of the green line and the red line. So recycling, what we've looked at for recommended changes to the recycling system in Lacombe is a curbside recycling program. When we looked at the different systems that were available within the community, we see the curbside recycling program as having a definite impact on our ability, or the community's ability to divert material from the landfill into a reusable or recyclable program. The blue bin program was most widely supported by the community. We also looked at a blue bag program and a blue roll-out tote program. So it was supported by the community. It was certainly supported by the pilot project area, which we'll go through in the memos, and reduces household waste. So the service level, we were looking at weekly pickup. Those residents that did experience the curbside program certainly supported weekly pickup, and we saw the volumes to generate that, or to justify that, sorry. And then we go with the sort of standard 70-liter bin provided by the city, and that's very common throughout Western Canada and probably Canada as a whole, although I haven't personally looked at Canada as a whole. This is a very common system, and it certainly works well. It's a contracted system, so there's a contracted pickup, and they're able to collect those picks very easily. The impact to residential collection rates of implementing this system would be an increase of $2.90 per month. Now, of course, that would normally be higher, but as council is aware, we did make a small raise of about $2.40, I believe, at the beginning of this year's solid waste rates. So that would take some of this. So beyond that, we also looked at the Wolf Creek Recycling Depot and what works there, what doesn't, what we should be doing in the future. And we certainly recommend keeping that site open. We saw the need for that site for commercial users and for Lacombe County. But when we did a count, we saw that just under 80%, I think 79.5% of visitors are currently using that site between 8:30 and 4:30 p.m. Monday to Friday. And we think that that number would even increase once residential collection is taken out of the mix, or once residential use is taken out of the mix. So that would let us control that site a bit better and keep it a little tidier, not see the number of illegal dumps that we do see there, which is definitely a weekly occurrence and often a daily occurrence. And that dumping almost always happens at night or on the weekend. So just having a gate that we can operate from 8:30 to 4:30, not a manned site. I don't think there's a justification for that, and the community didn't support that. But hours of operation would be really good for our operations without, we think, impacting the community too much from our counts. So currently the Wolf Creek Recycling Depot is funded through residential collection rates and not through commercial collection rates. So given that this site would be remaining open for the commercial collection, we're recommending an increase of $1.50 per month for bi-weekly collection for commercial users. So next up, we looked at the green bins program and composting within the community, municipal compost program. And we have made some recommendations to work towards an operational compost system within the community. And I should maybe preface this with a reminder that although we had a compost collection system in the past, that system did not result in finished compost material. It did not work to compost material. We were collecting material, and after a number of years, that was taken to a landfill and used as daily cover for those landfills. So what we're working towards here is not an enhancement of the current system necessarily, it is making the current system operational. So during this process, we came across a few regional initiatives that are on the horizon that we were aware of in the initial stages of the roadmap development, but that have really seen some positive development over the summer. And so the first of those being the 2 biorefineries that have developed in the region, or that are moving towards development in the region, I should say. One being the local biorefinex, who presented to council recently, and there's another in the region that's looking at the ability to take municipal compost and turn it into a finished product, or municipal grass collection, I should say. So that's one regional initiative, one set of regional initiatives that we think is worth looking at in the future. And of course, the regional commission, the Solid Waste Commission, has hired a very competent manager who I think one of his top tasks is going to be looking at regional solutions to solid waste problems faced by the member communities. So our recommendation is to look at an RFP for third-party disposal. We actually secured a contractor over the summer to deal with some of our excess material, as council is aware. We couldn't stockpile the full summer's allotment at our interim site, so we did have to get rid of some of the material at a cost of about $35 a metric ton. So when we look at that ongoing operational cost versus the capital cost of some of the other systems that were recommended originally, the capital cost just isn't as justifiable. We can get away with an operational cost with no capital investment and still remain agile and change systems in the future. If one of these biorefineries does develop, we can jump on board with that, or if the regional system, something develops there, we can jump on with that. And so it lets us stay agile. It still lets us have an operational compost system in an economical way that we know we have some control over the material being used in an environmentally sustainable fashion. It insulates us from the unexpected costs that could arise from trying new technology and experimenting with some of the more cutting edge stuff that we had looked at before. And so what that means from a green bins point of view is contractors that we talk to definitely want homogeneous materials. So they don't want a mix of grass clippings and a mix of chicken bones and garden waste. They want something that they can sort of have a reasonable expectation of what's going to be in that material and what's going to be making it up. So without a more robust system, we don't recommend expanding the list of acceptable materials. We think that we should keep them as is. But we certainly do see the need for more green bins in the community. I think that we can have a definite impact on the amount of solid waste collected in the community if we simply put more green bins out there. A lot of residents, we heard over and over that people had to walk too far, or was in a neighboring neighborhood, or it was full all the time. So we do recommend expanding the number of green bins in the community. So moving to this operational compost system and increasing the number of green bins in the community doesn't have a huge impact on residential rates, but it is an impact of about 50 cents a month, as you'll see there. And again, that is for an operational compost system. So although not a lot is changing in the community itself, behind the scenes, it's night and day. There's an operational system, whereas before our system did not follow this. So moving on to the residential bin types, we did have 2 streams of questions during our surveys. And so when we looked at rating the difficulty of maneuvering the black roll-up bins from current rollout users, and so that's residents who currently have a rollout bin and have had one for some time, we see that over 75% of them say they're manageable or very easy. 16% say they're not one way or the other, and then you've got 1% saying very difficult and 6% saying difficult. So the vast majority of residents who currently use the black rollers bins find them fairly manageable. We saw similar numbers certainly when we brought these bins into the pilot project areas, which are with a mix of front street and rear yard pickup. 72% there said it was easy or very easy, 13 neutral, and then 16 said difficult or very difficult. So one interesting thing that we saw in our weighing of the solid waste coming out of these communities was that in the month that rollout bins were introduced in the pilot project areas, which was July, the volume of household waste actually decreased by nearly 20% of what we were collecting. And as council will recall, in July we had 2 major storms, and so we actually would have expected normally for that volume to increase beyond what we'd seen the previous month. So we thought that was sort of a positive side to the bins for sure. So then we talked to current alley dumpster users and said, would you prefer an individual black roll-up bin over your current alley bin? And I kind of alluded to this earlier. Again, these are results from the Rethinking Lacombe Solid Waste Survey. 4 and 5 of those residents said that they would prefer to keep them. So that's a very significant majority of residents who currently have dumpsters do prefer the convenience and the cost savings offered by the dumpsters. So those in mind, just a few factors that went into our recommendations for the types of bins. So the solid waste volumes were significantly reduced in the pilot project area when rollouts were introduced, and current users of both the pilot project and of just residents in the community that have rollout bins find them easy to maneuver, but, and it's a big but, there was overwhelming opposition to the change from current dumpster users, as demonstrated in the results of the Rethinking Lacombe's Solid Waste Survey. So with that in mind, we recommend no change to this system, other than implementing roll-up bins in the new subdivisions as they come. And so that's something that we've partially been doing for quite a while, but we think that that's a good practice would be to continue with all roll-up bins in the new subdivisions. So in closing, we certainly want to to thank residents who worked with us and gave us their feedback throughout this process. It was a long process, and we talked to a lot of different people. For the most part, it was a very positive process, and so their input certainly was invaluable in making these recommendations. In particular, we want to thank the members of the pilot project, the communities, because they really experienced some rapid changes. Every month something was changing, and then at the end of it, we pulled it all back and said, we're going back to the old system, and people were really supportive of that process, really gave us good feedback, and we really did not have any negative experiences with the pilot project areas, so really thank those people. Questions about what's been presented, and then we'll move to the memo itself.
Thank you very much. Council, discussion, questions? Councillor Koenig?
So are we gonna do this like memo by memo, start with memo 1 kind of thing, because I have comments for each, I think that'd probably be easier. Thank you, Mary Christie. As far as memo 1 goes, the solid waste consultation, I thank Norma for addressing the concern with the member's name in the public documents. You know, had someone said something that, you know, Matthew Gowdy can't see the forest from the trees, sure as heck that would have been stricken, but, you know, we need to offer that same courtesy to the public at large. They can say what they want about us councillors, we're elected officials. If they want to put Reuben Connick as full of you know what, so be it. But when it comes to the members of the public at large and our staff, same courtesy we offer to our staff must be extended to the public. So I thank you for addressing that. And going forward, we have to be super careful of that. You know, we can't let that occur again. So thank you for that. My other question, Matthew, you had said that you had said that you didn't really think that the public open houses were working or a good idea. I don't think we should be too quick to dismiss the idea of them. I mean, we have tried in the past few years to be very much more open and transparent, and to say all of a sudden we're not going to have open houses, that kind of says it does in Massachusetts. I think had you held that open house in the active living fair, your response would have been much different. So I think we've seen in the past, our last coffee with council we took to the trade show, and I had some reservations about that. I didn't think it would work, but it did work very well there. So I think if you had had that booth in the active living fair, your responses would have been different. So I think we need to continue to go to events to draw people. And my only comment to this, otherwise I think your comments are good and well placed. I just think that, yeah, it's maybe the open houses maybe didn't garner the response you're hoping for, but I guess we need to be where the people are a little bit more. So thank you.
Mr. Connick, and that's certainly the intent of that comment, is that having separate open houses like that was not effective. So certainly piggybacking on existing events like the farmers market, living fair, that I think is a better use of resources than a city only one event or one issue open house.
Councillor Kate, then Councillor Creasy.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. That was my comment also, was that one of the purposes of doing this extensive consultation was to find out what methods of public engagement were effective and what weren't. And from the results here, we definitely saw what works and what doesn't. And we already knew as council that just an open house for any one topic is not effective. And so it again showed to be true. So I just wanted to extend my thanks to the Infrastructure Services Department and all those who were involved, because this was a tremendous amount of work from the staff perspective, but it definitely gave us the results that we were looking for.
Councillor Creasy.
Thanks, Mayor Christie. I too wanted to say to Matt, I do like some of the methodology you've used here and to come up with some of the conclusions. I'm not going to jump out on them and say I agree with them all, but I think there's been some very good work done here. As far as what Councillor Connick was referring to earlier, I think that I probably shared his horror when I read the report and saw individuals' names mentioned in there. And just for the record, I want to say that when I did bring it to RCA's attention this morning, she was equally shocked. So in my opinion, I do think that it was an oversight, I guess, to put it mildly, and thank her for bringing that up as well.
Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Mayor Christie. I certainly echo the comments about the work put into this, and I know that there was an awful lot of work, and I guess I have to acknowledge the public for taking the initiative to come forward. There was some great learnings. I think going forward, as we go through these processes, we learn what works really well. We take the best takeaways and we continue to work with those going forward. It's always difficult to get the whole community out to anything, so whenever we can use different pieces, I think we've got some great aspects of this thing that doesn't matter where we go with whatever process. We've learned that from previous discussions that if we try everything, some of it's going to work well and some of it isn't going to work as well, and not to say that it's not going to work the next time. So just I do certainly want to acknowledge all the support that you got behind the scenes, Matt, from your staff, because there's an awful lot of work there, and I know you're taking all the accolades. So, but the public at large, I have never talked to as many people about one topic in my 7.5 years that I've been on council as this issue of recycling, because I mean, it's not just the garbage, it's the recycling. Certainly composting never ever hit the radar like I thought it would, but the other two did, and so I'm really thankful that we're coming to this, and I love the way you summarized everything. I certainly appreciate it, and we'll make some other comments as we go forward.
Councillor Rempel.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. I just want to publicly acknowledge Matt and the team that did this as well. Like everybody's already said, a lot of work and well worth it. Like Ian said, I probably couldn't go to work one day or the gas station or the grocery store without having people come up and talk to me. And I know that people aren't going to agree with everything we do on council, but you know, it's encouraging to see that people will come out and voice their opinion and feel like they can be heard. And even though sometimes there were a few you know, people that weren't necessarily happy about what they're hearing, at least they were willing to kind of listen and go through this process. And I think we have learned a lot from this, and we'll be able to move forward in the right direction. That's not good for just a few people, but for our whole community. So thank you to everyone.
All right, and I too think that the most important part of this as well is the consultation process. And I've spoken to other communities that have processes, and I think sometimes people feel a little overwhelmed. They feel if they get a survey every month, it's just another survey, and they don't tend to look at them. So I think if we can, as Councillor Connick alluded to, piggyback onto existing functions, such as in the fall, we always have the Active Living Fair, and in the spring we have the Trade Fair or the Home Show or whatever it's called. And if we can piggyback onto that with our year's consultation on 3 or 4 different projects, and do that type of thing. I know that one city received an award, a municipal excellence award for their governance day is what it's called, and they have one day right at City Hall within their city, and I think they survey the public with regards to 3 or 4 important projects that are going to happen over the year. And before they get their ticket for their hamburger and hot dog and pop, they have to fill out the survey. So, but I think that is something that would have to be planned for and work towards. So if we can piggyback on a couple different things, do it all at one time, then people don't feel bombarded, and it's not just another survey that they're getting in the mail and that they're throwing out. Because I think it's very, very, very important, the input from the citizens from the start, before a lot of this work is done, before a lot of the research is done, and that will definitely help our staff and help our staff be more efficient and look at the things that the citizens are really looking for. So that is something that I looked at as well. And you want to move into the memo from here?
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, I think we've talked about about this memo. But certainly we are looking for, I don't think there is actually a.
Just information.
Just information, so maybe if there's nothing further on this one, we'll move to number 2.
Okay.
So memo number 2 is curbside recycling. So council is aware of the recommendation there that we move to a curbside recycling program with a blue bin of 70-liter size with weekly collection from contracted services. Certainly that was supported by our responses to the surveys and heavily supported by those residents that were involved in the project area. So the increase in commercial and residential rates is listed there. I guess I will open that up to questions or comments from there.
Thank you. Councillor Bousman and Councillor Koenig.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. I really do appreciate as well the process that we have gone through, and I didn't want to reiterate the same comments as others have made. On this particular memo, the times are a little bit different. I'm not sure if you noticed that, Matt, on the potential recommendation for opening at the Wolf Creek Recycle Depot. It states in here it's from 8 a.m. till 4:30 p.m., a little bit different than you said 8:30. I don't know if that is a critical matter, but I think a little bit earlier is probably appropriate. I'd also like to suggest that there should be some consideration made, if we're going to go this particular route, to having maybe once a month, let's say the 4th Saturday or something, where it is also open. There are numerous families in our community that they both work, husband and wife, as well as work either in town or out of town, and to access the facility during the normal working hours of a normal weekday is not going to be possible. Now, I know this is related to business use, and those from the county, etc. as well, but you can be guaranteed that some people are going to use it on a continuing basis from the residential, especially if they happen to have gone to Costco that weekend and they come home with all sorts of cardboard. Other than that, I appreciate the change recommendation from going to that hot rod system. Even though I felt that hot rod system was exceptional in its technology, realizing there's limitations to it, and further research has certainly been beneficial to help us understand that we have way more options available to us, and I appreciate that, so thanks.
Councillor Connor.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. I too support the move towards recycling. I think it's long overdue in this community. I mean, we've done it, of course. We've had the Wolf Creek recycling, but going to something citywide, I think, is a good step in the right direction. Although I have some concerns, though, in terms of myself, I favor the tote for the few extra cents. Price difference. I think it's still a better route because you have a lid. I mean, one significant windstorm and that thing is loaded. Granted that a lot of it's going to be paper and so forth, so you could see a lot of it end up on the street or else. So I still kind of like the idea of a rollout with a lid, but that's just myself. If it's the tote, so be it. I think it's still a step in the right direction. However, I'm not entirely sold, and I've said this from day one. I said, you know, if your garbage is picked up in the back alley, so too must, you know, your recycling. I'm not sold on the front side, curbside. I think I mean we can write that into the contract with the contractor that he can go down the back alleys myself. I honestly think that's still the better way to go. I'm not, you know, I'm sure sold on the curbside, but I am sold on recycling. I think it's definitely the way to go. As for the Wolf Creek Recycling Depot, again, I support leaving that open. I'm not entirely sold on the times. I think an 8 to 8 might be a little better, because of course we're going to have to fence this off and put a gate there, and I think you're going to find that you know, someone's going to show up at 5 p.m. and is simply going to leave his stuff there at the gate and drive away. You know, most of our daylight hours are 8 to 8, even in the winter. And so my thing, I know it doesn't fall in line with your employees' times, but I think an 8 to 8 time schedule, Monday through Friday, would be better suited to the recycling people and myself. And those Are my only comments as far as recycling goes.
Councillor Foster?
Thanks, Mayor Christie. Obviously, recycling is extremely important, and it certainly ties in with the next memo. And so we want to be really, really good at recycling, and I think this is a great start. I think I'm going to just about agree with everything that Ruben has said tonight, which is really going to be interesting because that hardly ever happens. I love the idea of having the box not tipping over. I'm not sure how that would work. I haven't used the blue box smaller bins ever since I've been in Lacombe. I used them in Red Deer, but it was a much smaller box than the 70 tote. Seemed to be fine because it was a lot smaller and maybe less likely to tip over. I really don't know that it matters front or back, although it would be nice for wherever it is now, it should stay there. The Wolf Creek, I totally think that we need to have a supervised spot. I'm sorry, I have been there way too many times, and I know that citizens will put stuff in bins that shouldn't be there, just because it's easier and because one is full and they're not going to take it home with them. And there's going to be lots of opportunities for residents, not commercial, but residents that have filled up their bins with the normal stuff, and we just need to have that system open longer, and we have to have it manned. I really think that if we're going to be serious about it, let's do it right. Let's when you look at all that information that Matt has gathered from all those other communities and that, it makes sense that we're not going to be followers. Let's get up to speed and let's really do a wonderful job of recycling and show the rest of the province that we are the most beautiful city in Alberta. Thank you.
Cedar McCoy?
Thank you, Mayor Christie. I just at this time wanted to say that the intent with the recycle depot, Councillor Foster, is that it will be a single stream recycling facility, so we'll no longer have separate bins for cardboard versus glass versus we'll have bins that everything can be disposed of in. And now, of course, our bins are becoming contaminated because that's not the case. So it will be much easier for people to be able to put items into one bin versus having to sort and put them into a number of bins. So I think that will certainly help the situation. And should council feel that the facility needs to be manned, certainly we can cost that and provide council with the cost of manning that facility if you feel that's the optimum scenario.
Councillor Christie?
Thanks, Mayor Christie. I guess if in fact that is the case, we're going to have bins for basically we'll hold everything, and I'm not sure what the reason behind having the facility closed at all would be. Well, I appreciate it's not necessarily convenient for public works personnel to clean it up. I would far rather have people dump it there than I would in our alleys and whatnot throughout the city. At least it's in one spot. For those that lean that way are going to do it, I think that's where our public education program is going to play a huge part and trying to smart those individuals up, but it's going to take some time. As far as the recycling itself, I guess it's no secret that I have not been a huge fan of these blue box programs. It's not to say that I'm not a fan of recycling and reusing. When we look at the numbers here, it's a very difficult thing to justify. Perhaps you could go through with me, Matt, on the issue analysis, that if in fact, I think you're taking a fairly conservative estimate here and suggest that we can divert 200 metric tons of material from our waste stream if in fact the entire city or the entire residential area was on board. 200 metric tons sounds like a, excuse the pun, a ton of garbage. It really does. But I mean, when you compare that to our 10,000 tons that we send to West Dried Meat Lake every year, it's pretty insignificant. If we even double that, so that we come more in line with some of the other communities here that you're saying that are up to a maximum of 200 kilograms for residents making 400 tons, I mean, that represents 4% of our waste stream that is considered residential garbage or residential trash that goes to West Dried Meat Lake. When you look at the dollar figure that is involved in handling, accommodating that 4%, my numbers worked out to, I think the total was around $300,000 you had suggested, Matthew. So that works out to about, I think it's just under $1,700, $1,650 a ton. And there again, if you're not used to working with these types of figures and know what it is, that sounds perfectly logical. If we extrapolate that out into our entire residential waste stream, that's just under $16 million a year. I mean, I don't think you'd have to go too far to find anybody who would have an issue with that. I mean, I just don't think that in our present situation, when we're paying $18 a ton for tipping fees at West Dried Meat Lake, how do we sell this to the public and justify spending, depending on the numbers used, anywhere from $1,700 or divided in half, $800 per ton, as opposed to 18? I mean, those numbers are not justifiable, I don't think, in anybody's mind. I mean, I'm not so sure that some of the suggestions how this is somehow a time crunch issue, that we're under some sort of impending doom that West Dried Meat Lake is going to be off the roadmap for us. I mean, when I contacted some of the management there and went over the area that they have proposed, and they sent me a map, and we've got, we're on phase 1 right now. I think it was, I don't know about the actual land mass, but it's a big site. We've got about 28 years, give or take, in phase 1. I believe there was identified thus far 17 phases. And I'm not suggesting that all of those phases are the same volume or acreage or anything. But I mean, we're looking at somewhere between 80 and 100 years of capacity at present use. Naturally, the population that increases. With all of this in mind, I guess what I'm saying is, time really is on our side. No, time doesn't last forever, but we do have time to think about this and come up with logical solutions that have genuine benefit. And I don't think that jumping into this Blue Box program with the contractor, with all the initial startup costs and the high costs for our residents, is justifiable at the rates that we're going at now. Certainly if I've made mistakes with my numbers, I'd be happy to hear from you, Matt, but it's a difficult one to justify, because it's not an easy thing to get out of once we're in it. And I'm not so sure that we wouldn't be wise to perhaps postpone this implementation for some time, and give some of those other factors an opportunity to come to fruition, whether it's through suggestions from the regional level or some of the other three that I can't think of off the top of my head that you went over. So, like I said, just a very, very costly venture for, again, I guess it's a marginal one at best, but it just, the benefit is extremely small, in my opinion, for the cost involved.
I think it's important. Sorry, I haven't had a chance to go over the numbers or anything, so I'm not sure if there's anything there, the numbers you presented, but I think it's important to note that if
if the scale that this decision is weighed on is financial only, then you will never see a tipping of that scale towards recycling. Because if that were the case, we wouldn't have this discussion because we would recycle everything, because it would be worthwhile financially for us to do that. The reason that we have the current system is because it's cheapest. It's been cheap to, I mean, it's certainly, you're right. It's much, much cheaper to dispose of this garbage through our current landfill contract than it will ever be to recycle this material. So if that is the scale, then I will tell you it will always tip towards that. So certainly I don't want to present to anybody that there is a financial benefit in this sort of an environmentally sustainable program.
CEO McQuarrie, Councillor Rempel.
I believe, with the Director Gowdy's comments, I believe we do have to qualify those comments that in today's world, certainly there is no financial benefit to recycling. Certainly, we don't know in 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years that will remain the case. What we do know is that the cost of building municipal waste cells is very expensive. We do know the availability of land is decreasing. So yes, in today's markets, there is no financial benefits. That may not be the case as soon as 5 or 10 years into the future.
Councillor Rempel.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. And thank you, CEO McQuarrie, for bringing that up, because my comment is going to be based on my grandson when I found some paper on the ground and just threw it in the garbage, and he said, Grandpa, he said, do you know that if you always threw paper in the garbage, that there's something about there won't be a future for me, or it was quite dramatic. And it made me think about how many people here have kids and grandkids that we have to think about not just the cost of doing recycling, but the effect of doing recycling. What do we want to leave for our children's children and their children? It's not just about right now. It's about, you know, where are we going to be in 5, 10 years? So I appreciate those comments that we know it's going to cost us some money, and we know that that it's not always an easy decision to make when it costs more to recycle than it does to you know, not recycle, but we do have to think about more than that, and we do have to think about our environment as well. Thanks.
Councillor Kite and Councillor Creasy.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. Those were pretty much my comments also. What Councillor Rempel just said, I just cannot consider us continuing to be environmentally so irresponsible and to do absolutely nothing.
Councillor Creasy.
Thanks, Mayor Christie. So I've had an opportunity to talk to a few experts in the waste industry, and certainly this discussion goes on between individuals and doctorates and all the rest that are far smarter than anybody in this room, I expect. And they can all come up with the same conclusion that in fact there's nothing evil and terrible about a landfill site, and in fact the mining that goes on to reuse those is becoming more and more viable. So I think to suggest that it's irresponsible of us to consolidate trash in one place is not entirely logical or backed by fact. I don't think that anybody in this room is wanting to do anything that's going to harm our children's future. I certainly do not. But to suggest that somehow diverting a minuscule amount of our total overall waste from the waste stream is necessarily a positive benefit, I think, is stretching the truth.
Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Mayor Christie. It's interesting that Councillor Creasy didn't talk about the Lacombe Solid Waste Commission that has some severe limits on it, which is 10,000 tons. That's the only discussion you had. what he didn't say is that we are constantly at that limit with our community and the rest of the communities around. So, number one, we cannot exceed that. That is absolutely not going to happen, or it's going to be very significant in the $20–30 million range, is the numbers that we've heard. So we can't do that. Number two, Vancouver. I spent a couple of days in Vancouver through the Federation of Municipal Communities, and Vancouver itself, going to the sites, they are really trying hard to get their residents up to 50% recycling. And it's happening, but it's taken a long time. I think that we responsibly need to do this over a period of time. It's not going to happen overnight. But do we need to do it, or do we sit on our thumbs and wait for 10 years simply because Dryden Lake can accept the waste? I don't think that that's the responsible way. I think that we need to look at that recycling. Yes, it's certainly going to cost us, but I think if you look at what the citizens have told us, the majority want recycling. And so I think it really is important to put this in place and learn from it. We're not going to have a cast in stone system. I assume that we will have some control over the contract with whoever we get, and if the blue box, the blue tote, whatever doesn't work after a year, we can look at changing it. We can whatever process. But I think it's going to be a real learning process. But I think we would send a really bad message out to our community if we said, no, we're not going to change our existing system that we have right now. And trust me, that system is not working. It is ugly, ugly, ugly. So I certainly support the fact that we spend a couple of bucks a month to improve our recycling facility.
Excuse me, Mayor. I just wonder if I could have some clarity why Councillor Foster would bring up the 10,000 ton limit at the Prentice landfill facility when it has no bearing whatsoever on what we're talking about here.
Can I respond? I don't understand what you're saying. The garbage that we are not recycling is going out there, and it's being shipped to Dryden Lake. I'm sorry, but I don't follow your question.
Well, I obviously do not. The 10,000 ton limit at Prentice is for dry rubble. That has nothing to do with pop cans and newspapers and stuff that goes in residential garbage. Nothing whatsoever. You were the chairman of this organization, Ian. You should go ahead.
Grant, if I can,
Gentlemen,
what goes into garbage in our system? If we have this whole system properly set up, we have proper recycling and we have proper garbage, there is a ton of stuff that's going out that shouldn't be going there. If it is proper dry rubble, it's going to go out there. But no, what's happening with it, it's going into our big bins. So if we're going to be responsible, let's be responsible for the whole system. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. You guys can...
Stephen, no, this is a significant issue here. Municipal garbage that goes into bins in a residential area within Lacombe does not go into landfill at Prentice and has no bearing whatsoever on our 10,000 ton limit. That is fact.
Thank you. Director Gowdy?
do you want me to weigh in?
Moving on to compost.
So moving on to memo number 3 is a compost memo. There, as I alluded to in my presentation, we have made a recommendation to basically go to a third-party contracted removal of this material. Third party sort of arm's length organization manage the disposal of this, and stipulate, of course, right in that RFP that we'll be rating based on the environmental sustainability of the final disposal method. So, as I was saying earlier, I think the advantages of this sort of a system, and maybe I'll just try to the advantages of this sort of a system are that it lets us stay very agile and make a change to a new system should that become available on a regional level in the future. And it lets us continue our existing compost program, which is a really important part of our diversion ability here in Lacombe. We see a lot of use of these green bins, and it's certainly a program that's had a lot of benefit for us. We're working properly, and so that's where we want to get this, just a properly working system. So as I said before, that it has a corresponding increase to residential rates of just over 50 cents and commercial rates of 15 cents, because of course commercial businesses in Lacombe see far yet less use of the green bin program. So with those rates, what you're getting is an operational system and more green bins in the community. Questions?
Thank you, Council. Councillor Kite, Councillor Bosman.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. To Director Gowdy, the increase of 50 bins, the green bins, I don't think that will be sufficient. Just in my neighborhood, we only have one bin for the whole long block, and going all the way to the end of the crescent there. And so we see lots and lots of grass in the regular back alley garbage bins. And lots of people have a long ways to bring it in. I'm thinking if the neighborhoods, all of the neighborhoods in Lacombe are in the same situation, 50 bins does not go very far.
We're certainly able to add as many or as few bins as council desires. For discussion purposes, they're about $900 per bin.
I have Councillor Bausma and Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Mayor Christie. I reiterate the comments from Odie Kite. I do agree that 50 extra bins will probably be not sufficient, and if it means that 50 bins one year and another 50 the next year, do it in stages is just fine with me. One of the comments that you had made, Director Gowdy, during your presentation at the beginning of this whole discussion was regarding the homogeneous waste that would be used, that would be coming from those green bins. At present, the green bins allow us to put in garden waste as well as clippings from our grass. Are you suggesting that garden waste will no longer be acceptable in that green bin program?
No, sorry, maybe I misspoke if I said garden waste. What I meant was that in the pilot project area, we expanded the acceptable list of materials to include all organics, so kitchen scraps and paper towels and all sorts of things. And I'm not, or we as administration are not recommending to go to that step because the contractors that we've talked to have no interest in that sort of mixed material.
So does the material will be limited to basically as it is at present? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Mayor Christie. Thanks for those questions, Peter. That makes absolute sense if we're going to be able to do the garden waste at the same time. And I think 95% of the community probably uses those grass bins for grass only. So it is going to be an education process to allow them to put the rest in. But we definitely need to have a lot more bins. I think we heard that loud and clear, and I think we're all saying the same thing, that we probably could use, if we can put it into the budget, 50 this year and maybe look to see, okay, so where are we at with the rest of it? Because the way that you had proposed it, I think was like 10 per year for the next 5. I think what we're hearing is we need that 50 right now, and let's see what happens. But we might be out a little bit, but I suspect that we need those 50 pretty quickly, just from what I've heard. So I'm glad to hear the other comments.
The only concern with 50 that I would have, we order a number of bins every year and a number of materials. 50 of those big bins is going to take a lot of space and a lot of time to prepare for our staff. They have to be painted when they come in and stencil. So we can certainly purchase 50 and get, I mean, we may be able to get all 50 done, but that is a bit.
Councillor Creasy?
Thank you, Mayor Christie. I too would suggest that 10 is a little conservative. I hear from people all the time up in Henners, and I don't know if that area is unique, but there is areas there that have none. So certainly I hope that areas like that in Languiny would be served prior to ones that just want to have more. But I mean, this is one of those low-hanging fruit things as far as reducing our haul rate to West Drive Meat Lake. That is a pretty easy one. I guess the thing I'm curious about is with the third-party contractor thing. There again, the whole naturally the cost comes into it. I'm just curious if we could have some sort of a comparison as to what it is to be handled by city crews, and either stockpile here. There again, I don't know if it's more economical to stockpile it here, wait for it to reduce in volume, fall to next year to be used at Prentice for cover, like you said that it is. I don't think that's a particularly horrible use for it. If in fact citizens don't really seem to appreciate it for a composter. You said it isn't suitable, which is fine. If it can be used for that at a reduced rate, then that's something that I think that should be considered. But I would like to see those numbers just so we can have some sort of a comparison. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we can certainly present those numbers. When we looked at that option initially in the spring, the biggest concern, of course, was availability of land. We would need to purchase land of sufficient size to operate this operational windrow system. And so that just wasn't. But we can sort of provide an estimate.
Councillor Connick?
Thank you, Mayor Christie. First comment, I'm glad to see that we've gone away from that hot rod composter. While I agree that technology is cutting edge, I'm not entirely sure it would have worked in our current climate. So I appreciate the fact that we've moved away from that. I would agree we need to increase the green bins, but I would agree with Councillor Foster we need to do a better education piece then, because I'm still a little, you said in your presentation, as Councillor Bossman alluded to, homogeneous materials, so I thought, okay, so that's just grass clippings, but now you're saying, I mean, I have from day one only put grass clippings in there because it says right on the side in the stencil, grass clippings only. So if we're going to take the garden waste, leaves, hedge clippings, brush, small brush, whatever, I think we need to really pass that message out there. In fact, I'd like to get to the point where we don't do the fall pickup then, if that's really what it amounts to. I mean, we could just put it in the green bins and we can, because that's a lot of a complaint too. People don't want to put it in their front yard, that fall pickup. Well, why should they now if we can just throw it all in the green bins? So I think that's if that's what we're moving, terrific. Then I think that's a great idea, and yeah, then we'll need more of the bins. But as Councillor Foster alluded to, I think we need a pretty good education piece on that, because I for one, have never put my garden waste in there, and I'm glad that we can now do that.
Thank you. Move on to memo 4, the residential.
So in the residential bin type, you'll see there we go through sort of what we have now and a brief discussion of why we were looking at other systems and why just what every other community in the province and most of Canada has been implementing this system. So we just see a lot of abuse of the bins, and we see some very high volumes of solid waste being generated in those communities. We did see a pretty major decrease when we switched bin types, and didn't hear a lot of complaints from residents that do use the bins today or that used them during the pilot project period. One thing that I found really interesting, and I'm still puzzling it out in my mind, is when we looked at the citizen satisfaction survey and asked people, would you prefer, if we moved to the black rollout bin system, would you prefer that it happened in the front or in the back? Residents were really split, just about 50-50 on front versus back, so 178 of the 400 said front, 198 of the 400 said back. And of those that preferred the front, the majority actually supported moving to rollout bins. So people that said I would prefer it in the front said, yeah, bring it on. There was very little opposition. About a quarter of people were opposed to it. But if you were one of the people that said, I would prefer it in the back, then it was more in line with what we saw in the Rethinking Solid Waste survey, that it was very strongly opposed to bringing in any sort of roll-off bin. So that kind of surprised me. I thought what we had heard when we went out face-to-face with residents was that people would be more supportive if it were rear lane pickup. But that's not what was picked up in the citizen satisfaction survey. So this graphic comes right out of that survey, and you can see there 40% would be very supportive of those who said they would prefer to pick up in the front of moving to rollouts community-wide. So I thought that was just an interesting statistic there. So we did look at if council does choose to go with the rollout funds program, we looked at where would be best to do that, and we're certainly recommending that initial implementation to occur would happen in areas with front or side driveways, because that's where people are already shoveling. They already have clear spaces in the winter to haul these bins up and down. And then we would look at conducting another pilot project of rollout bin pickup in the back. We did some of that this summer, and it worked fine. But we're concerned in the winter that a lot of people leave their bins when it is in the back alley in the same spot and don't move it from that spot during the week. And so there's a tendency, even with our dumpsters, for snow to build up to the point that we have to grade the lane or dig out the bin so that our truck can get its forks low enough to pick it up. So if we end up having to do that in all the rear lane rollout areas, that could be a major logistical task. So should council decide to go ahead with the rollout bins, we would certainly want to see the first areas, those areas with front or side driveways. And that's about 75% of the community you see down there. All the green ones and the yellow ones. We also looked at looking at a different bin style, because we did hear that a number of times in the community, that it would be easier to deal with a bin more like this one on the right, which is a more traditional bin that you see throughout the province. Requires a slightly smaller footprint for storage, but it's certainly more susceptible to tipping and going around and that sort of thing. When we looked at the survey, our pilot project survey, only 20% of people that experienced this bin type said that they would want a different bin type. So people that do use it, it looks a little cumbersome, it looks big and unwieldy. But most people, once they've used it, found the balance point, I think, on this bin is just much, much easier to use than this sort of bin. So you see the wheel here is right on the back, whereas here it's in the center support shop. So there is no appetite, very little appetite for switching bin type. So I go through a bit of the cost implication of switching to the rollout bins. There certainly is an extra cost of about $150,000 for an additional truck and driver, and then the extra bin purchase and repair. And then we go to the recommendation. Although there is some pretty significant benefits, I think, potentially able to be realized by switching to rollout bins, there was just a large community voice saying that that decision was not significant. So in line with that consultation that we received, our recommendation coming forward on the 15th will be that no change be implemented to current areas, with new subdivisions receiving rollout bins.
Council. Councilor Connick.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. I would agree with that recommendation, Matthew. I think we should just leave the bins that they are for now. You cited an interesting number that in the pilot project you saw a 20% decrease in garbage volume, and you kind of alluded to that was maybe part and parcel due to the fact that people were using rollouts. I would suggest it's also part and parcel that people were recycling more. So I think we're on the right track. Let's try the recycling and the compost, see what that does to overall garbage volume. And in the meantime, let's leave the big bins where they are for now. and then maybe, in the future we can revisit that, but in the here and now, let's move with the recycling and the compost and leave the bins where they are. Thank you.
Councillor Foster?
Thanks, Mayor Christie. Matt, I have a question regarding the cost of the changeover. Is that if we went to the more upright bin? Is that 19,200 or 9,600 per truck? For a total cost of 19,200. What exactly is the modification to do?
So it's just it's a change on the grabber arm. Right now we have forks that can lift both bin types, and so we'd have to add a new grabber to the actual pickup arm.
If we are going to a different bin. Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Thank you very much for that. So what I'd like to go back to is what was the reason that we started looking at this whole process? It is the abuse of our garbage, and I think this is a bit of a push backwards in respect to what is the right thing. When you look at all the other studies of all the other communities, one community in this entire study group that we did uses these big bins. So tell me, are we stepping back, or are we not going to go forward and do the right thing and control our garbage properly, because it is going to continue to be abused? I don't know how we're going to educate our people, because unless you put a camera on every one of them, they are going to be continually abused. And yes, we're going to have all the new places. I mean, I certainly agree that that's a great process, but I really don't know that we're really doing the responsible thing by letting the status quo when we know exactly what happens with those bins, and we've had this problem for many years, and it will continue. So I really support the fact that, yes, I understand the gallery is completely against what I'm saying, but it needs to be said that we need the black rollout bins in our community and get rid of those systems that are going to be abused all the time. Thank you.
CEO McQuarrie, then Councillor Bosma.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. To Councillor Foster, certainly thank you for your comments. In terms of the recommendations before Council on the solid waste roadmap, these recommendations are predicated on public input. Certainly it was Council's direction for administration to go back and consult with the public, and we did so in a very comprehensive manner. And this is the feedback that's coming back from the public in terms of this particular recommendation and the other recommendations that have been discussed this evening as well. It is Council's prerogative. If you wish to direct administration otherwise, it's certainly your prerogative to do so. But I do feel it's important that I certainly advise of why these recommendations are being brought forward this evening.
Can I respond?
Short response.
Thanks, CEO McQuarrie. I understand exactly what the community is telling us, and I have no problem with that. But at the same time, we have been elected to make the right decisions for our community looking ahead. And when you look at the things that the city has done in the past for our citizens, whether it's putting a sidewalk in, whether it's putting roadways 20 feet wider than another area, where do the street lights go, where do the alleys go? The citizens trust us to make the right decisions. So, yes, I hear that a portion of the community is saying that they don't like these bins, but at the same time, going forward, I really think it's a step backwards. So, but I can certainly go with due process.
Councillor Bosma.
Thanks, Mayor Christie. As a point of order, if I may, I certainly respect the fact that we have many citizens in our gallery this evening who are very interested and engaged in what we are doing as a council and discussing tonight. But I have to admit to you, when you choose to discuss things among yourselves while we are discussing, it is distracting. And I have some minor hearing issues that does cause me to miss some of the conversation that's going on in council chambers, and I would like to do the best that I can as you have elected me to. So if I could respectfully request that you keep your comments till after the meeting's entirely finished, I would greatly appreciate that. Another item referring back to this particular area, I can certainly understand that our citizens have spoken and that they overwhelmingly wish to keep our large bins. I believe at this particular point we can continue with our due diligence, though, in that we can on an ongoing basis in some form or another analyze what is happening with our dumpsters. If we do actually implement a recycling program, that will make a difference in our volume of garbage, I expect. At the same time, it also creates an opportunity for less volume in the dumpsters means more potential for dumping that isn't appropriate. And I believe that even though we may make a decision to leave the dumpsters in the rear lanes as they are in those areas that are presently used in that fashion, that we need to monitor them in some fashion, that we can understand what is actually going on, and we can keep that data for future reference, for future decisions in the following years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rempel.
Thank you, Mayor Christie. I mentioned before that we have to listen to our residents and what they say, and I, to some point as well, agree with Councillor Foster that we also do have to think about what is leading up to and doing the right thing. So I totally agree with what Councillor Baldwin has just said, that if we have to, people want us to leave it the way it is, let's do that, but let's monitor it, let's take a look at it, and make sure that that if there are ways that we can reduce the abuse of those bins, that we implement those. And if we find out it's just not working down the road, maybe we need to take another look at this again and make some tougher decisions. But for now, I agree with your recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Creasy.
Brief before we had this meeting, we council got together and had me and there went over some items, and one person brought up the item of respect, and just so my conscience doesn't get bad at best, I'm going to apologize for what I said to Councillor Foster, rather how I said it, not what I said, because I am passionate about this subject, as is he, and I do respect him for his opinions, but I'm going to take that out and apologize in the manner that it was delivered.
Thank you, gentlemen. This is definitely